Guys, this is Kilo and I'm back with another video on this point and click adventure tutorial, and this time we will implementing the inventory. This is a whole chapter on its own, so we will take it step by step. So let's begin. What I've done is I created a new scene called it inventory, saved it to my scenes here, and of course in my UI folder I created a new folder which is called inventory, and I imported all of my sprites that I'm going to use on this inventory implementation. So what I'm going to do first is just create a new text rect here. And slowly I will start building my inventory setup. So create a new text rect and drop in the inventory base here. And this is just the background for my inventory, but this node also will be my parent node for all of the stuff that I put inside. So what I want to do here is have some slots inside this box here, and have actually multiple slots, which some of them will be hidden, and I will be able to navigate through all of my slots using some arrows here that I will put here, right and left, in order to navigate through all of my slots. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new child node for my text rect, which actually this will be called inventory container, because will be the parent node, which will contain the base script, the control script for my inventory. And inside it, I'm going to put scroll container. And I get a warning here because this requires something like a vertical box container or a horizontal box container, and I want a horizontal box container because I want to have some slots will be aligned horizontally. So I'm creating that. Let's first align this scroll container with my inventory background. And then inside my Xbox container, I'm going to create another node, a panel node. And in this panel node, this will be my slot. So in order to visualize that, I'm going to go to my custom styles here in the panel, and new style box texture, open this, and put the texture for my slot. The slot is not visible yet. I'm just going to call it slot, and because I need to go to my rect and define its min size, because right now its size is 0, so it's just a point in the scene. So now that I have that, I want to align this better, and so I'm just gonna take this and put it somewhere here, and in order to be symmetrical, somewhere here. And you can play with these values, you can play with the sizes. It's up to the UI design to define how this will look. So I have my slot, and inside my slot I want another node, which will be the node for my item. So here is an empty slot, and inside my slot I want to have a texture which will contain my item. So I'm going to put this here and align it again in order to fit my slot. And in order to visualize that, let's take one of my items, which is the old storage key, and let's put it here. And now you see that my texture gets expanded, and I don't want that. I want its size to be fixed and match my slot. So I'm going here. Actually, I'm going to click this icon, which is called expand. So now I can manipulate however I want, and I want its size to be 120 to 120. So it needs to be smaller than my slot size in order to fit well, and this is the value that I choose. And you see here that I get a good fit for my key. So now having that, what I'm going to do is just clear this texture for now. I just put it here in order to align my item texture in the slot. But now I will clear it, and I'm going to duplicate my slots here. And now that I'm duplicating hitting Control D, you see that I get multiple slots, and also I'm getting this scroll bar here. Okay, first of all, I don't like the spacing between the slots. It's way too tight. So in order to fix that, I'm going to go to my Hbox container, go here to custom constants, and check on this box here, the separation, and play with the value. Now I currently have 5 slots. I want to make them 4. So I'm just going to increase it until one of the slots disappears, and I get roughly 4 slots in my inventory here. Okay, so now I have this scroll bar, but as I told you, I don't want to use the scroll bar in order to navigate. I want to use some arrow buttons, which will go left and right. So to do that, I need to hide my bar here. I'm going to hide my bar to explain how this logic works. I'm going to hide this bar here, so it will not be interactable, but I'm still going to use it to manipulate its value. Okay, because if you go to the bar here and go to actually, if you go to the scroll here in my scroll container and go here and play with this value here, you can see that I'm scrolling through all of my slots. So if I just change this value here, I can navigate through my inventory however I want. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my scroll container here and go to my themes and create a new theme. And in the theme here, I'm going to click the theme, and you see that a panel popped up, and I'm going to click edit theme, add class items, and what I want to add is my horizontal scroll bar. Okay, I click this, I add this item, and now I have it here, and I can edit it. I'm going to my horizontal scroll bar, going to my styles, and now I'm editing every style. I just put a new style box empty here. And you see now that my bar just disappeared. But I can still manipulate this value here. So with that, I can navigate through my inventory without using the scroll bar. And instead, I'm going to have some buttons which will have a functionality that will make my horizontal scroll bar change its value. Okay, so now that my scroll container is set up, I'm going to create the buttons that I'm going to use in order to manipulate my bar. So I'm going to create a new node, a button node, which will be under my inventory container and not inside the scroll container. Okay, and here in the texture, in the icon of my button, I'm going to put the inventory arrow. And click here on flat in order to make it transparent. And I'm going to put it roughly here. You can put it whatever you like. And now I will call this left arrow button, and I'm going to duplicate it and put it in the opposite side. I click shift to snap it, so it's in the same Y value as my left arrow, and call it right arrow button, and go to the rect and inverse the scale in order to flip it. So I'm going to put it here, make it as symmetrical as possible, and now I'm going to create a script for my parent node, the inventory node, in order to start executing things. So click, go to the inventory and click script, in the script, a new script, and call it inventory container, and I'm going to put it in my scripts UI. Okay. Now that I have a script here, I can connect the signals from my buttons to know when each button is pressed and change the value of the bar accordingly. So here I'm going to my buttons and go to the node signals, and what I want is the pressed signal. So I'm going to connect it to the inventory container. Click connect, and this is for my left arrow, and also go to the right arrow and connect the signal. So I have these signals here in my inventory container script. I'm going to delete all this code and start writing all my code. So I want first to take my scroll container. Okay. So I want to take the node of my scroll container, which is scroll container, and it's called scroll container. So what I'm doing here, it's taking the node on ready. So when it's starting, I'm taking the scroll container node in order to manipulate it. And for the left arrow, what I want to do is the following. I'm taking the current value of my horizontal bar. Okay, so so I'm going to say scroll container, and it's scroll container get h scroll. That is the function that returns the current value of my horizontal scroll. And now I'm going to modify this value by setting the h scroll, by calling the setter here and put the value that it currently has, and subtracting 200. And that is a value that I experimented on. You can put your own value. This is roughly with 200, the bar will roughly move by one slot. So I'm going to copy paste this and put it here. And on my right arrow, I want to move left. I want to move right. So I'm going to add 200. Now, in order to demonstrate that, I'm going to go to my slots here, and in the first slot, I'm going to add an item in order to visualize how this bar is scrolling. So in my item here, in my first slot, I'm going to put the key. And in another slot, let's say the fifth slot, I'm going to put another item that I had. This is called crest button, but I'm going to rename it to just wolf crest or whatever. I'm going to figure out the name better later. But anyway, I have this icon here for an item, and I'm going to put here. You can't see it now, but supposedly we will be able to see it when I run the scene. So I'm going to run the scene. And now you see that if I click here, my arrows, I can move around my inventory. Like that. Okay, so this is functionable. But I want to make some small adjustments. First of all, you see that when I click here, I get a box, an outliner, a box outline, which I don't want. This is the default button pressed by Godot. And I also would like to add some animation to the buttons. So I'm going here in my left arrow button, And I'm going to my custom styles and click on the focus and put here new style box empty. And this will remove the box outline when I click the button. Same for the right arrow. Going here, new style box empty. And now, if I go to pressed here, if I check this and put a new style box empty, what is going to happen is a default effect by Godot, which I will show you right now, which will make my arrows move instantly left and right in order to indicate some sort of movement. So if I click play for my scene, you see now that my arrows move when I click them and I don't get the box overlay. So this is done. Okay, so now some extra small functionality that I would like to add is I want to create a button which will hide or unhide my inventory. So because I'm going to bring this inventory in my main scene. I don't want necessarily to constantly be shown to the player. Sometimes maybe the player wants to just hide it away, get it out of the way. So in order to add that functionality for the player, I'm going to create a new node button, and this will be called backpack button. Now I will show you what this does. Okay, I'm going to bring in the first icon for my button, which is the backpack closed. This is flat. In order to be transparent, I'm going to bring in the left of my inventory. So this button is not a child of the inventory container. It's a different entity, and it's kind of independent. Not exactly dependent, but it's something like an exterior node which only affects the visibility of this whole node here, this inventory container. Now, as before, I'm going to go to my custom styles, and for the focus, I'm going to add a new box style empty, in order to not get this box outline. And inside, I'm going to add a very simple script for my backpack pattern. And so I'm going to create a new script here, call it backpack button, and put it, of course, in my script's UI. What I want to do is toggle this button. So it's either pressed or not pressed. It's either closed or open. When it's closed, when the backpack is closed, the inventory will not be shown. It will be hidden. And when the backpack is open, then the inventory will be shown to the player. So I'm going to go here in toggle mode, and I will put a check mark here. And this will allow me to have two states for my button. So I'm going to go to the script here and preload two textures. So one texture for my open backpack and one texture for my closed backpack. So I'm going to preload, just drag the corresponsive texture, and it will copy the path. And here I'm going to copy paste this. This is closed, and this is closed. So I have the two textures for my backpack. And now this is very simple. This script is very simple. Since I have the toggle mode on, I only need to do the following thing. in my process function. So now if my button is pressed, that means that it is open. So because initially my backpack is closed, so the first time it is pressed, it gets open. So when it's pressed, I'm going to set the button icon to be open. Sorry, this is texture and this is texture. So the first time the button is pressed, it will open, and when it's not pressed, it will close. And of course, I need to put the delta in the process function. So if I run this, okay, first of all, I need to create a new camera because now my viewport is very restricted and I cannot see both the backpack and my inventory. So create a new camera, make it current so you can see it, and play with the zoom in order to get a more expanded viewport. I have it here. Now click play, and now if I click my backpack, it changes states. But of course, nothing is happening right now because I have no code for it. So the code for this will be very simple. I'm just going to go to my backpack button and connect the pressed signal to my inventory. And I'm going to do one line of code here, and I'm just going to inverse the visibility of this node. So initially, if my backpack is closed, then my inventory container should not be shown. So I'm going to hide it, and I'm going to click play. And now I can trigger the visibility of my inventory container. Okay, now I want to be able to manipulate objects around my inventory. So I want to be able to, for example, take this key here from this slot and put it in this slot. So in order to do that, I need to create a script for my slots. Go to the slots and create a script and put it, of course, here. I'm going to call it slot create, and within the script, of course, I need to get the item, which is a text direct, and it's called item. And for starters, I need two basic functions, and it's gonna be called pick from slot and put in the slot. So these are the functions that I'm going to use whenever I want to pick an item or put an item into it. So now in the pick from slot, I'm just going to do a very simple thing, which is just free, or rather clear the texture. So when I'm picking from slot, that means that whether it's empty or not empty, I'm just clearing the texture. So the item that was there does not exist there anymore. And of course, when I'm putting something into slot, then that means that I'm putting a new item. So I'm going to update the texture accordingly. So this function is an argument, and the argument is the new texture that I'm going to put into the slot. Okay, so this is the code for my slot for now. And now I'm going to go to my inventory container and do some coding here. So I've created some variables here. The first one is the slot class. I preloaded the script so I can iterate through all of my slots in the following code. Another one is the temp item texture. This is a temporary. This variable indicates which item is currently being manipulated. I have a variable for a current slot and a variable for a next slot, and this will help me identify in which slot I am right now and in which slot I was before. So with having all that, I'm going to go and say in my ready function, I want to connect a signal from every slot. So wherever a GUI input is happening in my slots, I want to know in order to detect the player's input, and the input in this case is the left click of the mouse. So the code for that will be for each slot. This is a temporary variable, so I'm going to call it each slot, and it comes from horizontal slot. And I'm going to take my slot container, and within the slot container I'm going to get the node, which is called hbox container. And I'm going to get the children of this node. So I'm accessing this node right here, the hbox container, which has every slot. And within that, I'm going to iterate it for every slot, and I'm going to connect a signal. So the signal that I'm going to connect is the GUI input. And you see that this happens if I go to my slot here. There is a signal here which is called GUI input, and it's called whenever an input event is happening. So whenever the mouse is clicked, is hovered, or it's released, or anything like that on top of the slot, I will be able to know it. So I'm going to connect every slot to the scroll container. So I'm going to say self, and that means that I'm connecting every slot signal to the inventory container node. And the function I'm going to use for that is going to be called slot GUI input. And then I'm passing an extra variable, which is the array of all of my slots. With having all that said, I must not forget to put the slot script to all of my slots, because currently it's in the first slot. I'm just going to select all of my slots and put in the slot script. Alright. Now, in the function that I called before, in the GUI slot GUI input, that is called wherever I receive the signal, I'm going to do some things here. So I'm going to paste some code here, and it's just a condition whenever an input event mouse button is happening. So that means wherever the mouse is clicked or released. So in the first if statement, I'm detecting whenever the click mouse, the left click is pressed, and in the second one, I'm checking whenever the button is released. So here I'm saying left mouse click, and here is for the release. So whenever I'm clicking, but I haven't released yet, that means that I'm currently picking the item. I'm dragging the item. But whenever I release it, that means I want to drop it there. So whenever I'm releasing the click of my mouse, then the item will be placed in the corresponding slot that I wanted. So whenever I'm clicking, first thing that happens is that my temp item texture is going to get the value of the current slot that I have clicked on. So slot item get texture. And of course, what I forgot to do is put on some parameters here in my function. And these are the input event and the slot. So I know which is the current slot that the event is happening. So the current slot is here, and I'm taking the texture and I'm putting it in the temp item texture. Next thing I want to do is define, or rather assign the slot to the current slot. So my current slot is the slot that I clicked on. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I want to have a node which will contain my temp item texture. And with that node, this node will be the node that I will be moving around my screen. And this node will contain the texture that I currently picked from a specific slot. So for that to happen, I need to create a new node here in my inventory, and I need it to have it below my scroll container in the hierarchy, because otherwise it will be covered by everything else, and I want to be on top of everything else. So I'm going to call this movable item, and within it it's going to be a texture rect, and the size will be the same size as my item in my slots. Okay, with having that, I'm going to take this item. I'm going to pass this item to my inventory container script so I can use it. This movable item. So change the name to movable item with lowercase letters, and within it I'm putting I'm renaming the texture rect to item. So now we're gonna write that movable item get node item. So I'm taking the item node of my movable item, which is a texture, and I'm telling that this texture is my temporary texture, is the texture that I'm currently moving. So that means that it's the texture that I just picked from my slot, and I am putting it in my movable item node. Next thing I want to do is reset the position of my movable item. So whenever I'm picking an item, okay, from a slot, then I'm taking this texture. I'm taking the texture from the item here, and I'm putting it here. So the moment I pick the item, I want it to go, I want the item to be in the same place. So I'm resetting the position of my movable item. So the global position of my movable items should be current slot item get global transform origin. and this just takes the slots item in global position and puts it in my movable item. So whenever I am picking the item, then this thing here will go there. And one last thing I want to do is say current slot pick from slot. So I'm just calling this function here in order to clear the texture from my slot that I just picked. The item. And sorry, this is need to be set texture, and it's texture. Okay. Okay, so what will happen when I release? When I release, I can actually hide my movable item. I don't need, and I shouldn't show this item anymore. And since I do that, I need to make it visible here. So when I'm releasing my my click, when I'm releasing the mouse, I want the movable item to disappear, and then I want to put the item that I was moving in a specific slot. So initially, what I'm going to do is put the item that I was using, that I was moving around, in the current slot, in the slot that I picked it, in the slot which I picked it from. And the reason I do that is because if um, I don't, if when I release my mouse, my cursor is not above any slot, so I'm outside of this box here. So let's say I pick the item and bring it here in the empty space. Then I want my item to return to the slot that it was previously into. So initially I'm just going to put it back to where I picked it from. So I'm putting my item to the slot it was before. And after that, I'm going to override to swap my item in another slot if I moved it in another slot. And I will show you later how this actually works, so bear with me right now. What I also need to do is set a bool variable to true that I'm placing an item right now. So I'm going to create a new variable, which is bool, and bool, and initially it will be false. So I'm placing an item, and that's all I need to do. And one more thing, this all would happen if temp item texture is not null. Because I don't want to do anything if I picked an empty item. Okay, because with the way this code works right now, I can pick an empty item because I just can. Every slot has an item, whether it's empty or not. So I can pick an empty texture, and I don't want to take an empty texture and put it anywhere else because it might replace an item, an actual item that exists in a specific slot. Now, since I picked an item, I want to move it around, right? So I'm going to create a function which is called input, and it's called whenever it takes an input. So almost always, for example, whenever I move my mouse around, this function is called. So if my movable item uh, get node item is visible, so I'm making my item visible here, right? So whenever I click, I'm picking an item up and I want to start moving it around. So whenever that happens, I'm going to update the global position of my item. I'm going to upgrade the global position of my item to where my mouse is. And I'm also putting an offset here. This is a value that I experimented before, and it's because I want my item to be centered. Uh, because I want the texture to be centered in where my mouse is. I can also do that by, I don't need to add the offset here if I just go here and take the position of my item and put it in the center of the origin of the movable item. But I just want it to be, the position want to be 0, 0, 0 here and put the offset here. It's just a personal preference. Okay, and also don't need to write this thing here. Get node item is just a movable item. The visibility of the movable item. Okay, so now what happens when I take an item, taking an item and putting it in another slot? When that happens, I know that I'm placing an item because I have my bool variable here. And then I'm saying that the next slot is slot. So let's see what happens. I'm picking an item and this function is called here. This condition is called. And whenever I'm letting go of the mouse, this section of the function is called. But this whole section has the information of the current slot that I picked from. So in order to obtain the new information of the next slot that I move the item to, I'm taking another call of this function. And this will be called when my mouse is hovering another slot. So when my mouse is hovering another slot and I know that I want to place an item, then I'm going to execute this code. So I'm saying next slot equals slot, and then I need one condition here. If next slot item get texture equals null, then I'm going to execute things. Because if it's not null, then I'm going to overwrite the item, and I don't want to do that. Because if I'm taking an item and putting it in a slot that has already an item, then this item is going to be overwrite. I don't want to overwrite item. I will have an extra condition when I want to combine items, but this is another section that will come later. So when I do that, I do current slot pick from slot. So what I'm currently doing is I'm swapping the item from the current slot to the next slot. So I'm picking it here. This is my current slot when I click the mouse, and the next slot is when I left the mouse and my mouse is hovering a specific slot. Okay, so I'm saying current slot, pick from slot, and then next slot, put next slot, put into slot, and what I'm putting is the temp item texture. And I'm saying that the temp item texture equals null, and place item equals false. Now if I drop an item in a slot and I don't move in the next slot, then I'm not resetting the place item to false, it just stays true. So I need to also do that by creating a timer. So I'm going to create a timer, and in my process function I'm gonna say the following. If place item, then start counting. So if I'm going to place an item but nothing is found within a specific margin of time, then I'm going to stop placing the item. So I'm going to explain right now what this means. Okay, so what this means is that if I take an item from here and put it there, then okay, it returns my current slot, but the place item is not resetted. Okay, so I want to use the place item to put the item in another slot, but if I don't move in another slot, then I want to stop placing the item because I already returned my item to the slot I was currently at. So I'm making a very small margin, and this is enough in order to determine if I'm placing an item anywhere else in another slot or not. Okay, so finally I hit play, and look now. I'm taking the item, put it in another slot, I'm putting in an empty space, returns to my slot, and then I can take another item and try to move it here, but it won't happen because I cannot override the item. Now I could write a function to swap items, but it's not that necessary. I will in the future make a function to combine items if possible. So there's one little thing that's happening. You will see when I change the slot, the item appears in the previous slot for an instant and then moves. And this is because this happens first, and then it realizes that it needs to swap the items after, and then it swaps. So for a brief instant, my item is put in the previous slot and then moves to the next slot. So I found a solution for that. It's not the optimal solution, but it's also create a very cool effect. Not that cool, but a nice effect, and it's not that bad of a solution. Maybe you can find your own, but this one is just a few lines of code, so I will show you what I do with it. I put another variable here, which is a bool, and say that if I am to wait, if you tell me to wait, then for a brief moment, I'm going to make my item. I'm going to hide my item, and then I'm going to call this function here, which is a coroutine, and it will start counting a very small amount of time, and then make the item visible again. So if you tell me to wait, then I will wait in order to show my item. And so here, when I return my item to the slot, I tell the function to wait, but here not. And now if I hit play, you will see that my item does not appear in the previous slot anymore. And also, if I instant click this, it makes this appear and disappear effect, which is nice, and it will be even nicer when I make the next implementation, which will be create an active slot, so I know which of my item I'm currently using. Okay, so there is this one last thing, but I'm gonna speed things up a little because the video is getting very long. So, as I told you, I need to create a functionality to have an active slot, and with this active slot, I will know which item I am about to use. So to do that, I need two textures for my slot, for my slots, for my. I need two textures for. I need. So in order to do that, I need two textures for my slots, and one is the default slot, and the other is the active slot, which I have in my inventory folder. And then I'm creating a new style for its texture, and then I create a new instance of the style and set the texture of this style to be the corresponding texture, default or active. So with that, I also need a function to tell it whether my slot should be activated or be in the default state. So I'm going to create a function called toggle activation, and it takes a boolean which is true if I want to activate it, and it's false if I want to deactivate it. Okay, so that's for my slot. Let's go to the inventory container. Here I need another variable which will be called active slot. It's equals to null in the start. And then I'm going to create a new function which is called activate slots, and all that does is it takes the slot that I want to activate and deactivates all the other slots. And now to call this function, I'm gonna go here when I'm placing the item and set the active slot to the current slot, and then I say activate slots and I activate the active slot. And I do the same thing when I am putting it in the next slot. So this time my active slot becomes the next slot, and it activates this slot and deactivates the rest of the slots. And this is called H blocks container. So you'll see now that if I hit play, I'm choosing the item and it becomes my active item. I move it in another slot and it becomes the slot that I move it to becomes the active slot. I click on another item, becomes my active item. I move it around and it's still the active item. So yeah, this is for the inventory. Of course, the last thing you need to do is make this thing not visible, because at first my my backpack is closed. So I'm making this not visible. Put the backpack above it in order for the movable item to go above the backpack when you move it around. And this is the complete implementation of my inventory until now. Of course, there are still things you need to do. We need to bring it into the main scene. We need to create a database for our items and stuff like that, which we will be working on the next videos.